Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Nurgle, which is hopefully going to get a major improvement with the Thrones of Decay DLC that is going to come out later this year. And I'm making this video well in advance of that because, hey, maybe Creative Assembly will see it and maybe they will decide to improve certain things with Nurgle. Nurgle is one of the worst races / factions. I would say the race is the mnemonic race. Nurgle is a faction within that race. By the way, Nurgle is one of the worst to play in the entire game flat out. Like, Siege and Nurgle, two of the worst. The Demon Prince, of course, the worst by far and away. But what makes Nurgle so bad is unique. Like, he's uniquely horrible in terms of how bad he is. See, with most races, when we think about what makes a race weak, it's either the units they have that they're just not strong enough. It's their economy, casualty replenishment, or lack thereof, bad auto-resolve situation. Well, Nurgle has good casualty replenishment. In fact, Nurgle can get some of the best casualty replenishment in the entire game. Army roster-wise, when you think of the Chaos Warriors of Nurgle, as well as the Chosen and Nurgle, those are some of the best infantry units in the entire game flat out. They'll win against any other infantry unit. The Chosen and Nurgle with great weapons, they'll win flat out against any other infantry unit in the game. So Nurgle has certainly a great deal of power. Magic, yeah, it's pretty solid. Kugaf, surprisingly, is actually the best duelist, at least in skirmish. He'll beat anyone in a 1v1 fight. But what makes Nurgle bad is the way that they work in a unique fashion. Certainly the situation in the economy is a problem, but it isn't the only one. However, there are the economic situation is what greatly contributes to Nurgle's problems. Now, Kugaf is not just bad because he starts next to Helm Gorst, who is kind of designed to hard counter what Nurgle does, because they both rely on replenishment. Just Gorst is better. He has cheaper army, he has better economy, he has great replenishment. But the problem with Kugaf is not just that he's got to deal with Gorst or Imric, or then, holy mother, Grimgor. Yes, look at this campaign. It's turn 32. I've defeated Gorst, Imric, and now Grimgor is showing up with 3 full stacks, and that's just the advanced guard. He's probably going to throw in more and more. And he's, by the way, at war with other factions as well. So, yes, Grimgor is the tide of death and destruction. But the situation in the Mountains of War being basically Grimgor's, bring Grimgor's for the taking, or Grimgor's to lose, is a completely different discussion. I mean, the Ogres are pathetic. Gorst kind of is strong, but he ends up in a 2-front war with both Rhesus and Kugaf when no player is touching any of the factions there. And while he won't lose, it's like that just gives Grimgor all the freedom to annihilate everyone that stands in his path. Oddly enough, a lot of people have posted videos like how campaigns work, and generally Grimgor doesn't win in the very, very long game, though I imagine that has to do with either Snitch or Cafe, depending on who wins the war over there in Grand Cafe. But Kugaf's issues aside, here's what makes Nurgle so terrible and what Creative Assembly needs to improve upon. First off, let's talk about structures, and not just the economy, but buildings in general. Nurgle has flat out some of the most expensive, or the most expensive buildings in the entire game. We're talking here for basic military buildings costing 5,000 and taking 4 turns to build. We're talking advanced military building costing 10,000, and that's in suitable climate, and basic infrastructure building is costing 2,000. Now, the design of all of this is based on the idea that as Nurgle, what you'll be doing is you build a structure once and you will eventually get all the benefits from every single tier. So it goes from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and it goes through the cycle of life and death. That is how Nurgle works. Here's why this ends up being horrible, because there's numerous reasons behind this. 1, it requires you to pay an upfront cost. 2, beyond the major upfront cost you're paying, the second reason this sucks is that the way Nurgle's economy is structured is that you have these buildings and infrastructure, all the buildings generate some income. The higher the tier of the building in the cycle, the better the income. The problem with this is, one, the income isn't that great. It goes like 300 for infrastructure buildings, all the way to 400 for advanced military, or 700 for one of the advanced military buildings through the Living Tree of Decay. And then if you get to tier 5, if you're fortunate enough to reach tier 5, it will generate 700, but it's not constant. It's not stable income. So you might generate a good amount of money one turn and then generate very little another turn. This really hurts Nurgle. And the third issue with this is, since you have these unique structures, when you take a settlement, what's really bad is, like, when you take a settlement, you'll have to build everything up from scratch. So you have a weak economy combined with the biggest buildings costs in the entire game, combined with the fact that you generally don't take structures from the factions you're fighting. There's no conversion, or very little of it, from another faction or another race to Nurgle. So you're going to have to build from scratch. This, to put it plainly, fucks over Nurgle in a lot of ways, because it means you'll expand slower, it means you'll be weaker, and it means your overall economy, which is weak, is going to suffer tremendously as a result of it. We can talk about Tzeentch's economy and all the issues Tzeentch has, or Scarbrand, but they can make money. It's just the problem is they pay a lot. Nurgle pays a lot, and that's just buildings. It's not like Nurgle units are cheap. They are not cheap. You look at the cost of recruiting units here, the expenses are pretty high for any advanced unit, like 1,700 for a unit of Chaos Warriors. I understand it's far away from home and you can do it globally, but it's still pretty insane. The problem, by the way, with this is not just in the nature that you're paying a lot for buildings, it's also how you can make money from trading settlements you don't want. See, one of the main ways to cheese the game, to make money from the AI on a high difficulty, and why I play on a high difficulty, is you take territory from a faction, and then you sell it to another faction. So, for instance, over here, Emmerich took Ruin's End, took it over, sold it to Drazov. This is a great way to improve diplomatic relations, to establish alliances with other factions, to get a significant amount of money. This is how even races with weak baseline economies can still stay in the game, because they capture territory and then sell it to other factions. Also, fun fact, Nurgle can vassalize other factions through diplomacy alone. This doesn't work for Nurgle because everyone fucking hates you, and two, because whenever you take a settlement from another faction, you won't get a conversion to their structures. You're going to have to either build everything up from scratch and then trade it, and the AI faction you're trading it to won't get really anything. They'll lose the buildings just as easily. But on top of that, you're not necessarily going to be able to sell it for money. You might be able to eventually get the vassalization agreement, but it is a pretty damn tall order between aversion and the economic issues. So Nurgle has a lot of problems going against them from that perspective. And this really needs to change. Like, I understand the concept, I get it, that's the cycle of life and death, but having an economy where you don't have any kind of certainty, and it can change significantly from one turn to another, and at the lowest, like spending 2,000 for a structure that generates 300 at the highest level and not consistently 300 is fucking ridiculous. That's the problem. For Nurgle with structures. You pay a lot, you get very little in return. And this also affects your unit recruitment. Those 10,000 advanced economic military structures, they might give you a couple of units. So you already have very limited armies, and it's very hard to recover from losses of any good units that you might get. Like if you lose a unit of Chaos Warrior as well, enjoy waiting for a very, very long time to be able to recover from that. There's absolutely no reason to play Kugaf right now as opposed to playing Festus, which is one of the major things that Creative Assembly is going to have to worry about with regards to the DLC. Because if you're a Nurgle player, like, it's similar to Siege. Like, what's the reason to play Siege as opposed to playing Village if you want to focus on a themed army of Siege? Same with Nurgle. I'm sure there's some people who will justify it, but it's likely that people are not going to buy this DLC for the Nurgle aspect unless they do a really good job. They'll probably buy it for the Empire and Dwarf aspect, especially if... Like, the thing is, Empire and Dwarves, they do need help, but they can be far more easily fixed. With Nurgle, the issues are intrinsic. Like, you have the issues with the recruitment system because it's tied to the structure system, and you have the issue with the structure system, and you basically have to rebuild the faction from the ground up in order to make it work, like in terms of recruitment. I understand why they took this, made this recruitment system, but there's too few units. Like, look at Grimgor, AI Grimgor. If I was playing Grimgor by turn 32, at this point I would control all of this. Yes, all of this by turn 32, and I'd be swarming with well over a dozen armies. That would be better quality than what I'm able to do here, trying really hard playing as Kugaf. This is not a meme playthrough. Like, I was genuinely trying to win this campaign, and, well, things didn't exactly go in my favor. I figured that if I help Greases, maybe he can build enough armies to contain Grimgor. Yeah, that was a fantasy that I believed in. Didn't turn out to be the case. Okay, so the unit recruitment is terrible, though the units themselves can be strong if you're recruiting the higher ones. The demons themselves, the Nurglings, the Plague Bearers, the Plague Toads, they're pretty crap. Some are decent enough, like the Beast of Nurgle and all that, or the Plague Drones, but for the most part, what you really want to get are Marauders of Nurgle, Forsaken of Nurgle, and then Cast Warriors of Nurgle. That's what you want to get your hands on if you're playing Nurgle, which are very expensive units. So recruitment costs, like, just to give you a comparison to understand how stupid this system is. Siege can get Warriors of Chaos for like less than 700. Nurgle has to pay 1,700. Like, what? Like, consider Grand Cafe and how cheap their Jade Warriors and Jade Crossbowmen are, which will win, by the way. A combination of Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen would smash you to pieces. This is how stupid Nurgle is. The faction never worked even within the realms of Chaos, and right now, in the context of Immortal Empires, it ends up being far worse. One of the benefits, of course, for Nurgle is that the way your hero capacity works is pretty decent. Like, you get recruitment, you get extra hero capacity. So I guess if you're playing Nurgle, you pretty much have to rely on mass heroes because not much else is really going to work out for you. But then even then, you do need resource buildings to make that work. So yeah, a complete redesign of the economy, a complete redesign of recruitment, a complete redesign of buildings, being able to actually take settlements and having those buildings, like, those would make Nurgle far more playable than it is at the moment. Or if you're going to keep the system, have improve the baseline economy, like, of lower tier buildings by a lot, like easily triple it. I'm not joking. You could easily triple it, and Nurgle would still lose to Gorst if you're not careful, just to understand what we're talking about here. But it would make the experience far more bearable. Furthermore, getting more units through this fucking cycle, because the way the cycle works right now just doesn't really end up making that much sense. Like, it kind of makes sense, and even then, not really. But look at this cycle, like, from this tier 5 building, which requires a tier 5 provincial capital, you only get like 1 unit of chosen Nurgle and 1 plague drone of Nurgle, and you only get chosen and it's not like you get all of the chosen of Nurgle. No, you just get 1 of Grey Weapons. You do get obviously 1 regular chosen of Nurgle earlier on, but still major issue as I see it with respect to this. Too few units, the units you do have are too expensive, so lower costs, improve economy, give us more units. That would go a very, very long way and might be fun. The plagues, having to spend an enormous amount of time researching plague ingredients is annoying. And also, it would be good to know, right, it would be good to have an idea what the hell you're going to unlock with research. Because, like, you actually have to go into this menu and then read in the research tree what plague you're going to get. And it can take a long time. A lot of the plagues actually feel pathetic. Like, for Nurgle, the Master of Plagues. Do you know who are the Master of Plagues in this game? Ain't bloody Nurgle. The Skaven. Yes, Skaven. I'm not joking on this. Have better plagues. That isn't a fucking joke. The Skaven plague is a nightmare to tackle. The Nurgle plagues are pathetic and inconsequential to deal with for other factions. You might take some attrition damage, it might hurt you a bit, but like the amount of damage they do to a player who's dealing with them is insignificant. Like, Nurgle plagues should be enormous, like if they're gonna make it such a big part of it. And here's the thing, Festus is better at plagues than Kugaf is. If that's gonna remain the case with Tamarkan, yeah, I'm not really going to see a lot of reason to play Tamarkan, because it's likely going to be Tamarkan as well as the Dark Lady of Null, and we'll see who ends up being the Legendary Lord for the Dwarves. At least that's how I would read the DLC. Yes, there are some powerful benefits, but even with like 100% income from sacking and looting settlement, like, you want to talk about 100% income from looting and sacking settlements? You could get that, and you'd still be beneath Grimgor in terms of economic potential. And fun fact, Grimgor's armies are not necessarily cheaper than Kugaf's army. Like, look at this army. It's only 4,500. It's likely Grimgor's stack over here is more expensive than what Kugaf has, but I'm struggling to maintain 2 armies over here in this campaign, whereas Grimgor AI, which you can imagine has lost a lot of troops, and is fighting a multi-front warfare in both north and south. Well, Grimgor is ranked 2 on the map. What more do you want? With respect to that. Like, it's amazing how good a race like the Greenskins can be, or the Dark Elves, or High Elves, or even Cathay compared to this rubbish. So, better economy, easier access to units, better units, and I would also say that the resource buildings do need to have some level of baseline economy, not just buff the income from all buildings in the province. Because, yes, it is powerful to get resources for the hero capacity. Could we get down in some economic potential over here? I mean, to be fair, like at Stern 32, I'm generating 2,000 over here, but keep in mind what I have in this province over here, in this particular province, to achieve that. And I'm only really generating money from that province. Granted, I could have generated things more from nobler country, but I literally didn't have the money to invest in this to make it work. And this is in a situation where you might rob a Cathay caravan or 2, though it's actually harder to pull off as Kugaf than you might imagine. Still, it is a genuine misery to play Nurgle compared to, say, Festus. And if Creative Assembly thinks that they're going to get away with a couple of cosmetic changes, no, they're not going to get away with that, because people are just, like, if you're telling me to play Nurgle in the DLC, I'm like, why the fuck should I play Nurgle? Tamarkan's story? Thanks, but no thanks. I would not want to endure another campaign as Nurgle as I have here, for instance. And like this campaign, I just want to throw it away and pretend it never happened. This was misery. Like Kairos, like I played back-to-back Kairos and Kugaf, 80 turns in total, 84 turns in total. Siege was terrible. Kugaf was like a nightmare, a living nightmare. It like imagine one of the worst total war experiences you've had in your life, and that's what you get with Kugaf on legendary difficulty. Horrible. Just a completely terrible situation. And it's kind of sad, really, because it's like you got the casualty replenishment, you do have the unit roster to actually deliver great results in both Hotresolve and manual battles. It's just don't have the economy. The diplomacy doesn't work because the structures don't work. The structures themselves are very expensive and ridiculous. I'm not sure what Creative Assembly was thinking with this, to be quite honest. And just before I end this, I really hope that the people making mainline games, I'm not talking about Pharaoh. Pharaoh is made by the same people that make the Saga games. It is basically a Saga game in all but title, maybe with a bigger budget. But I'm really hoping that the people that make the mainline games are not the same people that made Warhammer 3 Realms of Chaos. Because if they are going to be the same people with the same approach, I mean, I don't have anything against any individual developers, but if they're going to approach things in the same way, it is also the next game they make is also going to be an utter disaster. So we'll see about that. Kostin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. Special thanks to my patron, Alain, Vakra, Emma, and others, and to all of you who make it possible.